For 3 years, I bathed my dying mother, learned to manage her medications, slept on a cot beside her bed, and held her hand through the nights when the pain was worst. My brother and sister visited twice a year, for an hour, and spent most of that hour on their phones. So when our mother passed and we gathered for the reading of her will, my siblings arrived with a lawyer of their own and a plan to divide everything 3 ways, and to remove me from the house I had lived in and cared for her in, because, as my brother put it, I'd just been doing my duty. What none of them knew was that our mother, in her final clear months, had seen exactly who her children were. And she had left something behind that none of them expected. My name is Karen Whitfield. I'm 46 years old. And this is the story of how the daughter who showed up was nearly erased by the children who didn't, and how our mother, from beyond the grave, made sure the truth was told. Let me start with my mother, because she is the center of everything, and because I want you to know her before you hear what her other children tried to do. Her name was Eleanor. She was a schoolteacher for 35 years, the kind whose former students still wrote to her decades later, and she raised the 3 of us mostly on her own after our father left when we were young. She was strong, and funny, and fiercely independent, the sort of woman who fixed her own leaking faucets and balanced her own checkbook to the penny well into her 70s. She had a small house, paid off, and a lifetime of careful savings, and a teacher's pension she'd managed so wisely that, between all of it, her estate came to around $1.2 million. Not a fortune. But a life's worth of careful, decent work, and she was proud of every dollar of it, because she had earned it honestly and saved it patiently. There were 3 of us. My older brother, Brian, who is 50, a regional sales manager 2 states away, always busy, always important, always on his way to somewhere more pressing than wherever you happen to be. My younger sister, Sharon, 48, who lived an hour away and had, she would tell you, an extremely complicated life that left her no time for anything. And me, Karen, the middle child, divorced, no children, working as a freelance bookkeeper from home, which my siblings took to mean that my time was worth nothing, and that I was therefore the natural candidate to absorb whatever the family needed absorbed. When our mother was diagnosed, 4 years ago, with the illness that would slowly take her, there was a family conversation about what to do. I remember it clearly. Brian talked at length about how difficult it was with his travel schedule. Sharon cried about how overwhelmed she already was. And somewhere in that conversation, without anyone quite saying it, it was decided, the way these things are always decided in families like mine, that Karen would handle it. Karen works from home. Karen doesn't have kids. Karen can move in with Mom. It was framed as the practical solution. It was, I understand now, the moment my siblings quietly agreed that my life was the one that could be spent. And I want to be honest with you, I didn't fight it. Not because I was a saint, but because I loved my mother, and because someone had to, and because when I looked at my brother and sister I understood, even then, that if I waited for either of them to step up, my mother would spend her last years being managed by strangers. So I gave up my apartment. I moved into my childhood home. And I became my mother's caregiver, full-time, for what turned out to be the last 3 years of her life. I will not romanticize what those 3 years were. Caregiving for a dying parent is the hardest thing I have ever done, and most of it is invisible, and almost none of it is the gentle, soft-focused thing people imagine. It is learning to administer injections. It is changing sheets at 3 in the morning. It is fighting with insurance companies, and tracking 17 medications on a spreadsheet, and lifting a grown woman who can no longer lift herself, and doing it gently so she keeps her dignity. It is watching the strong, funny, independent woman who raised you become frightened and frail, and keeping your own face calm so she won't see your heart breaking. It is years with no vacation, no days off, no career advancement, and very little sleep. I did all of it. For 3 years. Alone. I remember one night in particular, maybe 18 months in, that I think captures it better than any list could. My mother woke at around 2 in the morning, disoriented and in pain, convinced for a few terrible minutes that she was a young woman again and that her own mother was in the house. She was frightened, and she didn't quite know me, and she kept asking where her mother had gone. And I sat on the edge of her bed in the dark, and I held her hand, and I did not correct her, because correcting a frightened person in that state only frightens them more. I just stayed with her, and I talked softly about her mother, whom I had never met, asking her gentle questions until the fear passed and she came back to herself and knew me again. And when she finally knew me, she looked at me with such apology in her eyes and said, "Oh, Karen. You should be sleeping. You're always here." And I told her there was nowhere else I would rather be, which was a lie and also the truest thing I have ever said. I did not get back to sleep that night. I had a client's books due the next morning, and I did them at the kitchen table while she slept, because the work did not stop just because the nights were long. That was an ordinary night. There were hundreds of them. Not one of them was witnessed by my brother or my sister. My brother and sister visited twice a year. I am not exaggerating for effect, twice a year, roughly, each of them. They would come for an hour, sometimes two. They would comment on how tired our mother looked, as though it were news, as though they were discovering it. They would spend much of the visit on their phones. And then they would leave, and in leaving they would say some version of "let us know if you need anything," a sentence that sounds like an offer but is actually a door closing, because the anything never had any content, and we both knew it, and the asking was a performance for their own conscience. Here is the part one have thought about most, in the time since. My mother saw all of it. People assume that the dying are too absorbed in their own decline to notice how they're being treated. They are wrong. My mother, even as her body failed, remained mentally sharp nearly to the end, and she watched which child wiped her chin and which child checked the time. She watched who learned the names of her nurses and who couldn't be bothered to learn the name of her illness. She never said much about it. But she watched. And she was a careful woman, my mother. She had always been a careful woman. I should have remembered what careful women do. There was one moment I'll never forget, because it was the moment I think my mother made her decision, though I didn't know it then. It was her 74th birthday, her last one. I had spent the whole day making it special. I'd baked the lemon cake she loved, the recipe from her own mother, and I'd helped her into her good blue cardigan, and propped her up with pillows, and we'd waited. Brian had promised to call. Sharon had promised to drive over. The afternoon passed. The cake sat on the table. Sharon texted at 4 to say something had come up with the kids and could we do a belated thing soon, which we both knew meant never. Brian called at nearly 9 that night, for 4 minutes, with a ballgame audible in the background, and spent most of it talking about a work trip. My mother held the phone and said, "That's wonderful, dear, and I'm so proud of you, and yes, soon," and when she handed the phone back to me her hand was trembling slightly, and she looked at the uneaten cake for a long moment, and then she said, very quietly, almost to herself, "Well, now I know." I asked her, "Now you know what, Mom?" And she just smiled and said, "Never mind, sweetheart. Cut us each a slice of that cake. It's too good to waste on people who couldn't be bothered to come." We ate her birthday cake together, just the two of us, and 3 weeks later she asked me to drive her to an appointment she wouldn't explain. About a year before she died, during one of her good, lucid stretches, my mother asked me to drive her to that appointment. She didn't say what it was. She was quiet about it, almost secretive, and when we arrived I realized it was the office of Mr. Davies, the lawyer who had handled her affairs for 30 years. She asked me to wait in the car. She was in there for over an hour. When she came out, she seemed lighter somehow, settled, the way a person looks when they've finished a task that had been weighing on them. I asked her if everything was all right. She patted my hand and said, "Everything is exactly as it should be, Karen. I've just been making sure of some things." And then she changed the subject, and being a daughter who had learned to respect her mother's privacy, I let it go. I did not think about that appointment again until the day of the will reading. But my mother, it turned out, had thought about it very carefully indeed. My mother passed on a quiet morning in early spring, with me holding her hand, the way I had held it through 1,000 difficult nights. I won't talk much about that morning. It belongs to her and to me. But I will tell you that in the days after, while I was still hollow with grief, still moving through the house we'd shared in a fog, my brother and sister underwent a remarkable transformation. Suddenly they were present. Suddenly they were calling constantly, full of energy and opinions. Suddenly Brian was talking about handling the estate properly and Sharon was asking pointed questions about the house and the savings. The children who could not find an hour a month for their living mother found enormous reserves of time and attention for their dead mother's money. And then Brian informed me, in the tone of a manager delivering an organizational decision, that he had engaged an attorney to represent the family's interests in settling the estate, and that we would all be meeting at Mr. Davies' office for the formal reading of the will. He said it in a way that made clear he expected the estate to be divided in equal thirds, and he added, with a carelessness that still takes my breath away, that obviously the house would need to be sold, and that I should start thinking about my living arrangements. 3 years I had cared for our mother in that house. 3 years I had given up my own life and home. And my brother's first move, before our mother was cold, was to start arranging my eviction from it. I want to tell you that I marched in there ready for battle. I didn't. I walked into Mr. Davies' office on the day of the reading carrying nothing but my grief and my exhaustion, genuinely believing that I was about to be divided into equal thirds and turned out of my mother's house, and that there was nothing I could do about it, because that is how these things go for the people who show up. They give everything, and they are told it was merely their duty, and they are handed 1/3 and shown the door. The room was tense. Brian and Sharon sat together on one side, with their hired attorney, a sharp man in an expensive suit who had clearly been briefed to expect a simple 3-way division and to make sure his clients got every advantage in it. I sat alone on the other side. And Mr. Davies, my mother's lawyer of 30 years, an elderly, courtly man with kind eyes, sat behind his desk, and he looked at the three of us for a long moment before he began, with an expression I couldn't quite read. I know now it was the expression of a man who knew exactly what was about to happen, and who had been waiting, with some satisfaction, to be the instrument of it. Before I read the will, Mr. Davies said, I want to explain something about its history. Your mother first executed a will many years ago that did, in fact, divide her estate equally among the three of you. That was her intention for most of her life. Brian and Sharon exchanged a small, satisfied glance. I saw it. However, Mr. Davies continued, approximately 1 year ago, your mother came to see me, and she executed a new will, which revokes and replaces the previous one. It is this current will that governs her estate. And before I read it, she asked me to play you something. She recorded it here, in this office, on that same day. She was entirely lucid, of sound mind, and the recording was witnessed and notarized to remove any doubt of that. She was very insistent on that point. I watched the satisfaction drain out of my brother's face and curdle into something else. Mr. Davies turned a small monitor toward us, and he pressed a button, and suddenly my mother was alive again on the screen, sitting in that very office, in the good blue cardigan she saved for occasions, her hands folded, her eyes clear and sharp and unmistakably herself. I had to grip the arm of my chair. Hearing her voice again, that strong familiar voice, broke something open in me. Hello, my darlings, she said. If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and you're all sitting in Mr. Davies' office, and I imagine the atmosphere is rather strained. I'm sorry for that. But I've reached an age and a condition where I would rather tell the truth plainly than keep the peace falsely, so I'm going to say some things, and I'm going to say them on a recording so that no one can claim I was confused, or pressured, or anything other than exactly what I am, which is your mother, in full possession of her mind, telling you what she has decided and why. She paused, and she looked directly into the camera, and I swear she was looking at me. Brian. Sharon. I love you both. You are my children, and that has never changed and never will. But I have spent the last years of my life watching very carefully how each of my children chose to treat me when I could no longer do anything for them. And I need to tell you what I saw, because I think you should hear it once, plainly, in my own voice. I saw that when I became a burden instead of a benefit, 2 of my 3 children essentially disappeared. You visited me, Brian, perhaps twice a year, and you spent those visits on your telephone. You did the same, Sharon. You sent cards. You called on holidays. And you told yourselves, I'm sure, that you were doing your best, that your lives were simply too full. But your lives were not too full to appear, very promptly, the moment there was money to discuss. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Brian's face had gone gray. Sharon had started to cry, but it was not the same kind of crying she'd done at the diagnosis. And Karen, my mother continued, and her voice changed, softened, the way it only ever did for the person in front of her. My Karen. You gave me 3 years of your life. You gave up your home, your work, your freedom, your sleep. You learned to do things for me that no daughter should have to do for her mother, and you did them with such gentleness that you let me keep my dignity to the very end. You never once made me feel like a burden, even though I knew that I was. You were there in the night. You were there for all of it. And you never asked for a single thing in return, which is precisely why you are going to receive what I'm about to give you, because in my experience the people who never ask are the only ones who should ever be trusted with it. I was crying now, openly, the way you cry when someone you've lost reaches back through time to tell you they saw you, they really saw you, after a lifetime of feeling invisible. So here is what I have decided, my mother said, and I have decided it freely, and clearly, and with Mr. Davies making sure every word of it is legally airtight, because I know my other 2 children, and I know they will try to fight it. Karen is to receive the house she cared for me in, which is her home and has been for 3 years and will remain so. And Karen is to receive the larger share of my savings and pension proceeds, because she earned it, in the most literal sense of that word, through 3 years of labor that any of you would have had to pay a stranger a great deal of money to provide. Brian and Sharon, you will each receive a share as well, because you are my children and I love you. But it will be the smaller share. And before you are angry about that, I want you to do something for me. I want you to add up what it would have cost to pay for 3 years of round-the-clock care. And then I want you to understand that Karen has already given that amount to this family, in advance, out of her own life. She has simply been reimbursed. You are receiving a gift. She is receiving a wage she long ago earned. My mother smiled then, that wry, knowing smile I had seen 10,000 times. I taught school for 35 years, she said. I know the difference between the student who does the work and the student who copies it at the last moment and hopes no one notices. I have always known the difference. Be well, my darlings. Be better than this, if you can. And Karen, thank you. For everything. I saw all of it. I saw you. Goodbye. The screen went dark. For a moment, no one in that room moved. And then my brother's hired attorney, to his credit, quietly closed his folder, because he was a professional, and he understood, the way professionals do, that there was nothing left to argue. A notarized, witnessed video of a lucid woman explaining her reasoning in her own words, alongside a properly executed will, is very close to the most unassailable thing in estate law. Brian, who had walked in expecting to divide and conquer, had nothing. There was no confused old woman to allege, no undue influence to claim. My mother had anticipated and dismantled every argument before they could make it, a year in advance, from beyond the grave. She had been a careful woman to the very end. Brian tried, of course. On the way out, red-faced, he hissed at me that I had manipulated her, that I had poisoned her against them. And I looked at my brother, and for the first time in my life I did not shrink from him. Brian, I said, quietly, you had 3 years to manipulate her. All you had to do was show up. She wasn't poisoned against you. She just finally told you the truth, and you can't stand that the person who told it was her. Here is what happened after. Brian and Sharon did consult, I'm told, with another attorney about contesting the will. They were advised, correctly, that contesting a notarized video of a demonstrably lucid testator was not merely difficult but nearly hopeless, and would cost them a great deal of money to lose. They dropped it. I have not heard much from either of them since. There was no dramatic reconciliation and no further war. There was just the quiet, permanent rearrangement that happens when the truth is finally said out loud and cannot be unsaid. I kept the house. My mother's house, where her books still line the shelves and her garden still comes up every spring, and where I cared for her, and where I now, finally, live a life that is my own again. I went back to my work. I am slowly, after 3 years of giving everything to someone else, learning how to have a life of my own once more. It is a strange thing, to be given your freedom back at the same moment you lose the person you gave it up for. The grief and the gift arrive together. They usually do. For a long time after, I struggled with something I didn't expect, guilt. Not guilt over my brother and sister, I had made my peace with that. But a quieter, stranger guilt, the kind caregivers carry, that whispers you could have done more, you should have been gentler that one time you were exhausted, you should have caught that symptom sooner. I mentioned it once, haltingly, to a hospice nurse who had known my mother, and she said something I've held on to. She said, "Karen, the people who feel that guilt are always the ones who did the most. The ones who should feel it never feel a thing. Your guilt is just love with nowhere left to go." I think about that often. The grief, the gift, and the guilt, all of it, in the end, just love with nowhere left to go. I used a portion of what my mother left me to do one thing I think she would have loved. I now volunteer with an organization that supports family caregivers, the invisible army of mostly women who give up their lives to care for dying parents and spouses, and who are so often, exactly as I nearly was, taken for granted by the very families they are holding together. I sit with them, the new ones, the ones who are 18 months into their own version of those long nights and starting to disappear inside it. I help them with the practical things, the medication spreadsheets and the insurance fights, because I know those battles by heart now. But mostly I just tell them the truth that took me 3 years and a video from beyond the grave to learn, that the work you do in the dark, when no one is watching and no one is thanking you, is seen. Maybe not by the people who should see it. But it is seen. And it matters. And you are not invisible, even when the people who are supposed to love you behave as though you are. I want to leave you with the thing I understood, watching my mother speak to me from a screen a year after she'd recorded it and weeks after she'd died. We tell ourselves a comfortable lie about families, that blood is loyalty, that the people who share your name will value what you give them. But love, real love, is not measured in what people say at the holidays or how loudly they grieve at the funeral. It is measured in who shows up on the ordinary, terrible Tuesday, when there is nothing to be gained and nothing but exhaustion to give. My mother spent her last years quietly keeping that account. And when the people who never showed up came for their share, they discovered that the careful schoolteacher had been grading them the whole time, and that the marks were already in. My name is Karen Whitfield. They called my 3 years of love just my duty, and they tried to divide me into equal thirds and turn me out of the house I'd cared for her in. They forgot that the woman I cared for was watching. And she gave me the only inheritance that ever mattered. She told them, in her own voice, that she had seen exactly who I was all along. If this story meant something to you, stay a while. There are more like it here, stories about the people who do the invisible work, the ones the world takes for granted, and the quiet, patient, deeply satisfying moment their devotion is finally seen and honored. No shouting. No cruelty. Just the truth, spoken at last, by the one person who knew it. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.